Good morning, everybody. Keith Engel with TGI Sports Talk. Welcome to the day after Thanksgiving 2020. Hopefully everybody had a great Thanksgiving as best as you could under these circumstances. I did my vlog the night before. You know, we do have a lot to be thankful for still, so I hope everybody had a chance to enjoy as best they could. And, you know, again, my condolences go out to the people that have been affected more than others. You know, my family's been fortunate, and some haven't, but it's a great country. We got a lot to be thankful for. So hopefully things are turning a corner or will soon. So let's keep a positive attitude. It's a great morning here in East Greenbush, New York. It's going to be in the 50s. Got to get the Christmas decorations out. My wife has probably already got me to have about 20 crates upstairs, so there's lots of work to do today. I want to thank my guest from last week, Rex Walters. We had a great chat, great reception to his interview, so I want to thank him there. And my guest today, who popped back in the room, we had a little technical difficulty, which was really on my end in the beginning, so I had to get the show started while Larry went out and came back, is Larry Farmer. Larry was an exceptional player at UCLA. When UCLA was winning championships year after year, became an assistant, became the head coach at UCLA and then several other universities. And he had quite a career moving around, which we'll talk about. And I believe Larry had told me he's got a book in the works, which we'll talk about a little bit today. And we will, touch on all of that. I want to get through Larry's career, talk about what it was like to be at UCLA and play for the great John Wooden, follow the great John Wooden, and I'm sure we'll have a great conversation this morning. And with that, I'll bring in Mr. Larry Farmer. Good morning, Larry.
Good morning, Keith. How are you?
Very good. Sorry for the. I'm trying to tell you you don't have any sound, and I obviously had not plugged in the the soundboard to the right computer, which is always a problem.
Hey, don't worry. I've just learned how to finally use a smartphone and gotten rid of the old flip phone. So technology is not one of my finer suits.
Well, it's hard for all of us of a certain age, I guess. We're used to simpler things, and as things get more sophisticated, they get harder for us, I guess, as well. I'm self-taught, and I have to use a lot of technology in my real job.
Right.
And some here, and I've had to teach myself. So we'd continue to try to learn.
No, that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, and I do appreciate you getting up at, well, maybe it's not an early hour for you, but for some people I've had out of the Eastern time zone, 8 o'clock is a little early, but I appreciate it.
No problem.
So, did you have a good Thanksgiving, by the way?
I absolutely did. I listened to your intro, your monologue, and, I think about some of the places throughout the years that I've spent for Thanksgiving, and you develop more of an appreciation the older you get. It's unfortunate that, we take one day, to reflect on our blessings and how, thankful we really should be when it should be every day of the week. But certainly keeping all of that in mind with the virus and the turmoil in our country, we certainly have a lot to be thankful for.
We do. And hopefully, it's a great country, and we will find a way. I know we will find a way because we're strong people, and we will find a way to get together on all these things and,
yes.
and work that all out. So I want to talk a little. We're going to cover, as I mentioned in a little intro, we'll cover a lot of topics today. And I really, when I was a younger man, and I'm younger than you, not a whole lot younger than you, though, but when I started to follow sports and college basketball, I mean, here in upstate New York, we got, 2.5 channels. So if there was a college basketball game on in the 70s, early 70s anyway, it was UCLA and somebody. So I was attracted to and obviously very interested in the great run that the team was on at that time. I became a bit of a Marquette fan after that. I don't know why. Al McGuire just did it for me. I don't know why, but early in my early days, I followed UCLA, and you were part of, I guess, as that dynasty was kind of winding down a little bit. You were on the tail end of it, but you played 3 years, and I don't know, lost one game, I think, in your playing career, and won 3 national championships, right?
Right. We lost one game my sophomore year, and that was back in South Bend, Indiana, to Notre Dame. The great Austin Carr went for 46 points in that game, and we had won 12 games in a row. We lost that game, and then we won the national championship that year, and then the next 2 years we went undefeated. So when I graduated, we'd won 75 games in a row. And then the following season, which would have been Bill Walton's senior year, they won 13 games, taking the streak to 88 games before they finally lost again in South Bend.
Yeah.
So the streak both started and ended at Notre Dame.
I was going to mention that it's when you mentioned the first shorter streak of 12 games that Notre Dame obviously had a history of breaking UCLA win streaks. So
there's an ominous history there. And one other little bit of history with Notre Dame, the old win streak, which was held by USF, 60 games. And that's when the great Bill Russell and Casey Jones played at the University of San Francisco. They had won 60 games in a row. And number 61 for UCLA in the 88 game win streak was also in South Bend.
Interesting.
So
that's very
not only
interesting.
did we book in, but we actually broke the record there too.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So what was it like playing? I mean, you played with obviously some great players when you were, player wise. I mean, I think when you started playing, you were playing with Sidney Wicks and Curtis Rowe and Keith Wilkes. Well, Jamal Wilkes now, but obviously some great players. And then Bill Walton, obviously, before you graduated. What was it like playing with that level of players?
The way Coach Wooden ran his practices, and many people I know have heard, and you read about how efficient these practices were. And, Coach used the practice. The practice itself was like going to class. Everything was timed out. It had a beginning and an end. It worked its way up in its physical exertion, and it always culminated. Fundamentals were taught throughout, and it always culminated, with more of our, the live part of a scrimmage, either in a hole or the part method, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5. And the reason I bring all of that up is, as a sophomore, every day in practice, I had to guard either Sidney Wicks or Curtis Rowe. Sidney Wicks would go on to be, in some polls, College Player of the Year. And you either get better every day in practice or you get embarrassed every day in practice. And, with Coach Wooden standing over there with that whistle, you really didn't want to get embarrassed. And so playing with those guys involved playing against them in practice. And you got better because of the level of competition in practice itself.
I mean, Coach Wooden, I'm trying to remember the story now, and I think Bill Walton told it about how he, before practice, he would teach him how to wear his socks and tie his shoes and, very basic things like that. Was there a lot of these Wooden isms that went on that didn't really involve basketball itself?
Well, the part about putting on your socks and tying your shoes, we would have a team meeting before the start of every season. And at that team meeting, Coach Wooden would give you a list of rules, what he expected of you as a UCLA basketball player in the community, in the classroom. And then you would get another 2 sheets, and it had your expectations as a basketball player. And every year at the beginning of the season, he would read through all of these in our team meeting. And so there were no questions to be asked what he expected of you, both on and off the court. And this would always end with him explaining to you how important proper equipment was for a basketball player. And you think about what equipment does a basketball player really have that's absolutely necessary. it's your basketball shoes and your socks. Because if you get blisters and you can't run, you can't cut, you can't jump, well, that impacts how you play. So he would go through this whole thing. The first time I heard it, I was a freshman. And so I'm sitting there and, we've got, there's, in those days, we had the freshman rule. So you had a freshman basketball team, you had a freshman football team. So that means in this team meeting, you had 13 or 14 varsity guys, and then you had, 6 or 7 freshmen. So there are 20 guys, there are 20 players in this team meeting. And so I'm looking around and, this guy's player of the year in his high school and this guy's parade All-American. And, it's the who's who. Everybody's got something, which is why they're on this team. Everybody's been awarded the best at something from the state that they come from. And all of a sudden, coach is talking about now when you put on your socks, you put on your socks and you put your toes in and then you pull it up and he's showing us. And I'm looking around. My shoes? Are you kidding? And so, you as a freshman, that's okay. But we do this every year. So by the time I got to be a senior, it was, I'd heard it before, but it was, he was not going to change. And that became a part of that first team meeting. He taught us how to put on our shoes and then how to tie, our socks and then how to tie our shoes properly. So the shoes stayed snug and we didn't get blisters.
That's a great story. And, it's really a story that kind of carries over into life itself, right? If you don't do the basics, you're not going to be able to get any further. Because there's a similar story I know about an Army general who told a story about, making your bed correctly in the morning before you do anything else. And it's kind of a similar philosophy, right? If you don't do the basics, how are you going to get any further?
And he was that meticulous about everything. And that was just one component that went into all of the different ways that he prepared us for practice, how we practice, telling us every day that, he never mentioned winning. We have to go out and win this game. We got to win this game. But he felt that we would give ourselves the best chance to be successful if we focused on the fundamentals and we mastered all of the little things. And so if you had come to a practice, for example, if you'd come to any practice while I was at UCLA, you would have sat in the stands and you would have gotten thoroughly bored. And if you stayed for a week, you would have fallen asleep probably 3 days into it because you would have seen the same drills over and over and over again. Now you would have seen some good play,
Yeah.
but the practice itself, you probably would have walked away thinking, these guys are doing the same thing every day and it's a little boring, but that was his method.
Yeah. And you talked about, obviously when you looked around, you saw all the great high school players coming into the program. And I talked about some of them in Wicks and Rowe and Bibby and Walton. And there's others, obviously, that I'm not mentioning, but who are some players that didn't get a chance to maybe stand out at UCLA that if they'd gone somewhere else, they would have been a star? Is there anybody that comes to mind that fits in your time there?
Oh, yeah. The unfortunate thing when you had the freshman rule, as I mentioned, you could have 12 or 13 players on the varsity, and then you could have, you could field a freshman team. And so, the year I came in, we had 4 freshmen. The next year when, Keith Wilkes, Jamal Wilkes, and Bill Walton, Greg Lee, if my numbers or my memory serves me correctly, they brought in 6 or 7 freshmen. And my college roommate was a guy named Marvin Vidito. And Marvin Vidito was one of the most heavily recruited student athletes on the West Coast. He was an amazing basketball player, but he was even more of an amazing athlete. His junior year in high school, the track coach asked him, because he was such a great leaper, he said, "Have you ever tried to high jump?" And Marvin told the track coach at his high school, "No, I've never really tried." So without having any formal training, they set the high jump bar up at like 6'6", and he had on his blue jeans and his Chuck Taylor Converse, and he went out and the track coach, can you jump that? And he cleared it.
That's amazing.
And so he comes in this fantastic recruiting class. He went to St. Joseph's High School, the same high school that produced Jason Kidd, and a lot of the records that Marvin held at that high school were records that Jason Kidd came along and then, either equaled or broke. But Marvin had a great freshman year, and then he redshirted as a sophomore. That we had Henry Bibby and Kenny Booker, and we won the national championship. And then the following year, you could redshirt more than once. It came down to him making that player rotation or not. And as gifted as a player as he was, he just wasn't going to be in that first rotation. So he wound up transferring and going to the University of Hawaii. And I can name player after player after player that came in. He comes to mind because he's my best friend and he was my roommate. But he would have started at any other school, and when he left UCLA, he became a starter at the University of Hawaii.
That's great. What about the competition itself? So you guys, not only obviously with dominating the NCAA tournament, you were dominating the Pac. Would have been the Pac 8 at that time, right?
Yeah, the Pac 8.
It gets confusing these days, right, with the conferences and the alliances and the way they've all changed. But who was? I mean, was there a team in the league that gave you guys trouble and ever really threatened your reign in the Pac 8 itself?
Yes, USC. They were obviously better known for being a great football school, but Coach Bob Boyd, he put together some teams that were very, very good. He recruited. Coach Wooden used to tell a story about, how all coaches would talk about, hey, I recruited all these guys, but there was the one that got away. And the one that Coach Wooden would always talk about, there was this one guy I really liked, but he got away. And that was Paul Westphal. And Paul
Great
Westphal,
player,
yeah, he went to USC, and USC had one season where they lost 2 games all year. They were undefeated and ranked in the top 10. And they lost, this was in 1969-70, and they lost 2 games all year. And they were both to UCLA. And because in those days, they only took, I think it was 48 teams, so they took the conference champions. USC, only having lost 2 games to the eventual national champion, didn't get invited to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
And so there was that natural rivalry that went on. We always had, you mentioned in the later years, the great rivalry with Notre Dame. That was always good. And then, in our league, you had Ralph Miller at Oregon State. You had Marv Harshman at Washington. These were, grizzled old veterans that, were Hall of Fame coaches. And, one year they might be a little down, but you could expect them to be, be much better that following year. And then usually went to the regionals. We played Long Beach State. They came around quite a bit. And that's where Jerry Tarkanian, he was back in those days before he was the running Rebels coach. Tarkanian ran a 1-3-1 zone and played slow down basketball and was great at it.
That's too funny.
I tell people what a great coach he was, because he, when he thought, okay, I can't win playing slow and playing zone, I'm going to play man to man and play fast. And, he was brilliant doing both.
It's funny that you mentioned Ralph Miller and oh gosh, I forgot who's the coach at
Marv Harshman.
Marv Harshman, right? Because I think you rushed the size of the tournament. I think at that time, I think it might have been 24 or 32 even. So
it might have been 32. You're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
So those guys who are great coaches, nobody even knew about them here, at least here on the West Coast or the East Coast. I'm on the East Coast, not the West Coast. I got to remember where I am. I have to say I had a good Thanksgiving. Us here on the East Coast, we didn't even hear about these great coaches until the tournament expanded and they got a chance to shine, later on in their careers. So
yeah, you're right. You're right. I did jump ahead. That 48 was a part of the expansion. That was, when if you finished second in your conference, you didn't get in the tournament. And you imagine that today, you go through a whole season and you only lose 2 games and you lose it to the best team in the country. That was pretty tough, but that rivalry was special. That USC, UCLA, growing up in Colorado and moving to the West Coast, I had no idea, how alive that rivalry was, and growing up in Colorado, I've told this story many times. I would turn on the TV at New Year's Day, and they'd show the Rose Bowl, and 9 times out of 10 it was USC in the Rose Bowl. So as a kid growing up, I was a USC football fan, and I didn't know any better. And my freshman year, when I got on the UCLA campus, I remember being around some UCLA basketball players, and I said, it's going to be fun being around here. I can watch USC football. And they looked at me, and I got lectured, and I learned really fast that no, we don't like anything that has to do with USC.
I'm saying it's still that way today. So I lost my train of thought, but that's what we were talking about, the tournament. So is there any doubt in your mind? I mean, those teams are so good, and maybe it's not fair to compare. I don't know that it's ever fair to compare eras in any sports, right? Because everything changes, or so many things change. With the expanded tournament and the rise of the mid majors, so better players are getting to these smaller schools. Players leaving early. You think those UCLA teams through the 60s and mid 70s would have been as dominant today?
I do. I don't know if the dominance would have lasted as long as it did, for the very reason, that you said. One, kids are leaving school earlier, and I'm sure that had that rule been in existence before, Coach Wooden hit the 10 championships in a 12-year period, some of those players that stayed for the 4 years, the 3 years of varsity play, but the 1 year of freshman play, probably would have left school. But in terms of just their all-out talent level, it would be hard for me to say that the better Kareem Abdul-Jabbar teams are the better Bill Walton's teams. I'm a little prejudiced about those because I played on them. But, you have guys that were great players in college that went on to be great professional players as well. So, that translates into, what you see today. The teams that have college teams that have the really good NBA, the future NBA players, those teams are going to be more competitive. They might not win a championship like UCLA did, but they're going to be competitive because of the level of athlete that they have playing. Yeah.
So let's talk about. So my guest today, for those of you who might be joining us, and I'll say hi to some of my people that are here every week, real quick, because I appreciate them so much. Dave Guyette, Steve, my dad's here. My dad's here every week. Love my dad. My stepmom never miss Friday's show.
Oh, that's terrific.
So I welcome them and everybody else who's joined. My guest today is Larry Farmer, former player, which we've been talking about his playing career at UCLA, and we're going to kind of pivot now to Larry leaves. You graduate, you get drafted to the NBA and the ABA, I believe, right?
Yes.
But made a decision not to pursue a pro career. What facilitated that?
Well, the decision was made for me because I got cut.
Makes it easier.
But I was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I was drafted by, in those days, the Denver Nuggets, and because we had the ABA and the NBA. And I went back to the Cleveland Cavalier camp, and they had the rookie draft was 12 rounds, so you had 12 rookies, so you had a full rookie camp. And from that rookie camp, Jim Brewer, who later went on to play with the Lakers, he played with the Clippers, but he was a journeyman. He was from the University of Minnesota. He was their #1 draft choice that year. But then after rookie camp, you brought the better rookies back. There was a cut, and then you brought the better rookies back, and then there was a veteran camp, and then after veteran camp, you had an exhibition season. So I was cut from the Cavaliers right before the season started. And sometimes things happen in your life to set you on a different path. The good Lord has another direction for you to head in. And so I get cut by the Cavaliers, and I went back to UCLA. Coach Wooden kept the graduate assistant's coaching position open for me. And so I still wanted to play basketball, but I went back to UCLA, and I actually got a year of coaching experience under my belt, working as a GA. And then the following year, I went to Germany to play professionally because I could make more money playing in Germany than I would have if I'd been a rookie in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Coach Wooden retires that following year. And when Gene Bartow, who followed Coach Wooden, was hired, he said, I want one assistant who played for Coach Wooden, who has some coaching experience. And so that 1 year of being that GA helped me fill, that job description. And so having just played 1 year of professional basketball in Europe, but only 1 year of actual coaching experience, I was then hired. I was 23 years old as a full-time assistant coach at UCLA.
That's got to be a rush. So it actually, and that's a nice segue, because it brings me to my next topic. Obviously, Coach Wooden retires, and Gene Bartow comes in, and then Gary Cunningham comes in, and these guys have great success. I don't think either one of them lost more than 5 games, if I'm not mistaken, in any of their seasons. But it's hard to replace a legend, and they're not winning national championships. What was it like? The pressure from the fans or the media or wherever it might have come from. How bad was the pressure on these guys that followed immediately, especially Coach Wooden?
It was very difficult because I wound up being an assistant for each guy that followed him until
Right.
it was obviously my turn. And you mentioned Coach Bartow. Coach Bartow in 2 years won 52 games and lost 9. He was 52-9. Now
Yeah.
nowadays, a coach does that in 2 years. They put a statue out in front of
Make
the
him a
arena.
lifetime contract. Yeah.
But it was the pressure in following Coach Wooden was just enormous. And I was on the staff, and I could say certain things to him about some of the unrealistic expectation, because I was a part of it. I was on 230-0 teams. I was on a team my junior year that won every game by 30.3 points a game, which is still
Right.
an NCAA record. And so there was a lot of the unrealistic expectation that I could kind of explain to him. This is just what we are. This is what to expect. But it was awful. And when Coach Bartow left UCLA, he went to UAB, and of course, he's a Hall of Fame coach. Made the NCAA tournament. I think it was 9 out of the first 12 years he was there.
Yeah, he built that program from scratch, right? I mean, they didn't have a program. Yeah.
Didn't have a program. Made him athletic director and then head basketball coach. Gary Cunningham, of course, was an assistant at UCLA with Coach Wooden. So when he came back, he was aware of the pressure. And again, 2 great years. Coach Bartow was there for 2 years. Coach Cunningham was there for 2 years, did a great job, didn't win a national championship. The noise around the program wasn't as bad with Gary Cunningham as it was with Gene Bartow. I mean, poor Coach Bartow couldn't do anything right. If we won, we didn't win the right way.
Right. Just because he was an outsider.
We didn't blow him out by enough.
Yeah.
And, 2 of those 9 losses were to Bobby Knight's Indiana team that had Quinn Buckner, Scott May, Kent Benson. And you East Coast guys know those guys.
They were okay. Yeah.
And 2 of those losses came to those guys. But everyone that followed, and then Larry Brown was after that. Larry Brown, one of the only coaches that's ever won an NCAA championship and an NBA championship. And he only lasted for 2 years. So the very thing that was great about the program.
That was Larry's MO at the time, though. He didn't stick around anywhere very long. So.
He did move quite a bit. He did do that. Every place he went, he won, but he only spent 2 years at UCLA. But the very thing that made it great made it difficult. It was easy to get involved with great high school players because you were UCLA. Your games were televised. It was the whole package. But the other side of that was the great expectation.
Yeah. So we go through the coaches you mentioned, and you're an assistant under all of them, obviously. And when Larry Brown leaves, you get the job.
Yes.
Was it? I mean, I don't know that handed to you probably is the wrong term. I mean, what was the process there? Were there other candidates, and how did it come about?
That's a very good question. When Larry Brown was hired, the athletic director at UCLA was a gentleman named J.D. Morgan. J.D. Morgan was a famous tennis coach at UCLA before becoming an athletic director. He'd actually coached Arthur Ashe, one of his most famous athletes. But I went out to JD Morgan's home, and he and I sat and we talked just like this. And what I didn't realize, I was 28 years old at the time, that he was going to interview several candidates, and I was one of them. And I went out there purely thinking we were going to talk about we're going to have this coaching change. How are our current kids doing in the program? Let them know that I'm going to hire a really good coach so none of them transfer. And so I thought I was really going out to just kind of give him the State of the Union. And after we talked, he let me know that I was just officially interviewed. I wasn't expecting it. And so that was the first sense that I had that, maybe somewhere down the line, I would be one of the people that they would consider. Well, then 2 years later, Larry Brown leaves. And now I'm 30 years old. And as it became more and more apparent that he was looking to leave, then I was finally contacted. It was right toward the end of the season that, because I've been approached by a couple of other schools. We had great success under Larry. So, when you have success, people want to recruit the assistants. And so I've been approached by a couple of schools. And that's when the new athletic director, Bob Fisher, told me that if Coach Brown left, that, it would probably be my job. So I shouldn't take any other jobs. And that was kind of how it happened.
Were you shocked to be in that position at 30 years old?
Even more so now when I think back about it.
By the way, who are those other schools that were recruiting you? I'm just curious. Do you want to share that?
The one school that I really considered, because it was right there in Southern California, and I felt that I could do a good job of recruiting Southern California because I had been doing it, Cal State Fullerton. They had a new athletic director. We sat down and we talked about, me going and taking that job. And again, it wasn't going to involve me moving and that huge recruiting pool that was Southern California. I knew people knew me. I knew high school coaches. And back in those days, before the AAU thing hit, having the network of high school coaches was really how you recruited kids. Right. And so that was, again, when you have success, you're going to have opportunity. But yeah, at 30 years old, I was not expecting that. But, when you're 30 years old, you're young, you're brash, you're crazy, you think you can do anything. And, I certainly wasn't cocky, but I felt that I could, I knew enough about UCLA to do the UCLA job.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, at 30 years old, it's funny you say, reflecting back, you probably should have been more overwhelmed than you actually were, right? So you get there, and obviously now you're three coaches removed from Coach Wooden. Mm-hmm. Is the pressure still the same at that time? It's three coaches, but it's still only, 5 or 6 years since Coach Wooden left. Right.
That's a great question. And I thought that there was enough distance when Larry Brown got there, even though, he did a great job. We get to the championship game.
That was a surprising run, right? That was a great run.
Yeah, amazing run. Finished fourth in the conference, and we wait till selection Sunday to even find out if we're going to be, now there are 48 teams, if we're even going to be in the tournament. And we go in as an at-large bid. We have to play a play-in game. And then we win that play-in game against Old Dominion. Now we're playing the overall number 1 seed that year, which was DePaul. Mark Aguirre, I think Terry Cummings. They had a great team. Yeah, but
great team.
So I thought there was enough, there was just enough time where, not that the expectations were normal, because they're never going to be normal, but I thought that there was not nearly as much pressure on Coach Brown as there was on Coach Bartow. But when I got the job, the first thing that, I played for Coach Wooden, 3 national championships, 89-1. So a lot of the old history walked right back into that program with me. And I was proud of it. And so that amped up that whole connection to Coach Wooden and championships when I got the job. So then it started all over again.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because obviously expectations, the game is starting to change at that time, right? As you mentioned, more teams getting into the NCAA tournament. mid-majors start to rise a little bit because they're getting that exposure and getting better kids. So recruiting's got to be harder. I mean, you had some really good players. You had some really good seasons. You won the Pac-8 one year, went to the NCAA tournament. Is there anything you would have done differently in your run at UCLA that you feel might have changed the course of your career and you would have been there longer, or you just no regrets at all?
I really don't have any regrets. So many things started to change while I was there, and it was going to become a lot more difficult to recruit and get players in through our special, we called it special action, and bringing players in that might not ordinarily qualify to get in as a normal student. Every university has a special admittance program. And the unique thing about UCLA is I was one of those special action kids. And, I'm not going to name off others, but it's really because a lot of them were all Americans and all of them graduated in 4 years. And so the program was successful and it worked well for us. And during my 3 years as head coach at UCLA, some of those requirements got removed and other tighter restrictions got added. So a lot of the players that we had recruited in the past that had great playing careers, but graduated in 4 years with quality degrees. There was no, I'm not saying anything negative about a person that gets a PE degree. I'm not saying that at all. But there were other degrees that these guys got. Bill Walton was a history major. Jamal Wilkes was an economics major. It was going to make recruiting a lot more difficult, but you were going to be required to win just the same. And so I was given a contract extension after my third year. And I just thought, I don't see how I could continue to do what was going to be expected of me if I wasn't going to be able to recruit the same level of student athlete. And so it was a very difficult decision. After agreeing to a contract extension 2 days later, I resigned. But it was difficult for me at the time. But then as years passed and then looking back, it was the best decision that I could have made because I regained my love for the school, and I love the school. I've always loved it. And, sometimes you leave when you're supposed to. Often you leave when they tell you to leave, but this is one of those situations where, I picked the right time.
Well, that was fortunate. I mean, your time there was not, unsuccessful. You had some good players. Kenny Fields, I remember, Mike Sanders. I think you coached a young Reggie Miller before you left, I believe, right?
Yeah, I recruited Reggie.
I mean, that's a pretty good player. You certainly can hang a star on that one because he became a great player, obviously, in both college and the NBA. We talked a little bit about recruiting and the ones that got away. Are there some great players? Are there some players that you thought you were going to get maybe that you didn't get that might have changed your fortunes at UCLA?
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Or is there a whole list of them?
Yeah. There are always those guys. When I was an assistant coach, I remember we brought a young man out. He was just a terrific high school kid, polite. He came out, had a great visit. He went back to North Carolina. He wrote us a handwritten letter, James Worthy. And he said, I loved UCLA, but I'm going to go to North Carolina. So there was James Worthy. He turned out to be a pretty good player.
Yeah,
a couple years later, when Coach Brown was the head coach, we flew out to Boston and we made a home visit to a kid named Patrick Ewing. He's a pretty good player.
Yeah. And you would have inherited him, I take it, right?
Yeah. So that one would have worked out for us. But there were a lot of great ones. I recruited Doc Rivers. Which really tells you how old I am.
I remember Doc because as I said, I became a Marquette fan. So I remember.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Then you know how terrific Doc was. But yeah, lots of kids like that were, they say no, and then you see them years later, and they've gone on to be pros, and I've had a lot of fun with that. But yeah, there was a time, you coach at UCLA, you're going to get, you name the top high school recruits in the country, Ralph Sampson, you're going to be in their top three. When people ask them,
Yeah.
who are you interested in those days, one of the schools they're going to say is UCLA.
Well, TV changed recruiting a lot, didn't it? I mean, obviously, like I said, when I was a kid, you had a game on a Saturday and inevitably UCLA might be in it. So that had to help. But when all these, the Big East came into play, and it had to be harder to get kids from the East when they could just stay home and be on TV every week. It had to change the recruiting landscape a lot, I'm sure.
It did. It really did. We could go into a recruit's home, and between, CBS and NBC regional television, UCLA was on national TV 20 times every year. And, no one could say that. And I know there was one year when I was the head coach, we were going to play Iowa. And Iowa at that time, they were coached by Lute Olson, who later went on to Arizona.
Yeah.
And Lute Olson's team, he had 2 7-footers, and they were really good, and we were undefeated. And all of a sudden, I think it was NBC, they just decided, hey, this is a heck of a game. We're going to put it on national television. And so these were great recruiting tools that you could go in and with everything else that you would sell from UCLA, you could sell that. Then with, ESPN, like you said, and all these other networks, and, you had all these other tournaments, the amount of exposure that teams got, that became a very good selling point for those other coaches. And it wasn't something that was strictly, UCLA's anymore.
Yeah. So your time ends at UCLA, and it's funny because the way you mentioned it and told the story of your parting is really interesting. I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason. We're where we're supposed to be in life every minute. It's where we're supposed to be at that minute for whatever reason. Sometimes we don't know till later on.
Not till later, yes, absolutely.
But it's interesting that you had to leave to get your love back for the university, and I can see that it's still there during this conversation. So that's
question.
That's awesome. But you leave there and you go to Weber State.
Yes.
I'm trying to think where they play. Where they played, Big Sky.
Big Sky.
Big Sky. So I mean, what's it like? I mean, it's got to be, and again, not to denigrate Weber State or Loyola where you went later on. I mean, what's the big differences between coaching or playing at UCLA and being at Weber State?
Weber.
Weber
State.
Real, right.
Yeah, they're great schools, but these are mid-major schools, and they were. For me, it was a big culture shock change. Not only going from Los Angeles to Ogden, Utah, and UCLA was a high major program, at the highest level, but most kids play at the mid-major level, and so going to Weber State or to Loyola of Chicago or the University of Hawaii or Western Michigan, some of the places that I coached after UCLA, 80% of the kids that play college basketball, Division I, are playing at those kinds of schools, and
right.
The budgets and those kids that play at the mid majors, they get on television maybe once or twice every year.
Right.
And one of those games is probably against the high major, so they don't have a good chance of winning. So it was real world. It was one of those educations for me that, this is how basketball and recruiting and expectation, this is how things really are. It's a little different than at those high major programs.
I mean, was there a chance for you to, you obviously can't compete for a national championship at Weber, but anything, again, you stayed there, I don't know, what was it, 4 years? I think you coached there.
No, I was at Weber I was at Weber State for 3 years. And when you coach at a mid-major, you're not going to, your realistic goals are winning your league and getting in the NCAA tournament every year. And if you really turn things around, like the Butlers or the Gonzagas, Gonzaga's not a mid-major anymore, but at a
Not
time
anymore.
they were. That is that's the rarity as a mid-major, where you break through and then you actually start recruiting players that the high majors are recruiting, but you have an opportunity. My love for the game took me all over the world, and I just wanted to coach. I love basketball, and so I went where I thought I could win, and I had an opportunity.
Well, it's funny because obviously after you left Weber, and you had a pretty good year there, and things maybe went downhill. I mean, was that did you make your own decision to leave Weber?
No, they told me that they were going to go in a different direction, and and I knew that was going to happen because I inherited a very good team and we won, and then I had a team full of seniors, and then we had to recruit, and that recruiting process took 2 years to build up the team, and as often happens, when I got there, I was hired by one athletic director, and I was hired by one president, and the president retired during my first year, and the athletic director left. So now I've got a new president and new athletic director. Well, when you go through that transition where you recruit and you bring in your first recruiting class, you bring in your next one, and you're not winning, well, if it's the athletic director and the president that are responsible for you being there, those people are going to be a little bit more tolerant of giving you time to turn this around, and they weren't. So, but the good thing was the year I left, the next year with the kids I recruited, they had a good year.
That's
and I knew
interesting.
that was going to happen.
It happens a lot, right? I mean, guys change jobs, and the kids, somebody comes in and does well with their kids, and you don't hear about that.
Those kids that were freshmen had become sophomores. The kids that were sophomores were now juniors. Yeah. And so not only had they taken lumps those 2 years, but they learned from them. So now the next guy that comes in, he's inherited kids with 2 years of experience that were good players. And, and that's how things build. That's what happens. But I lost that job. And that the next turn actually took me overseas, where I was coaching.
That was my next question, actually.
Yeah. And that set up coming back to the States and actually working with the Golden State Warriors. So like you said initially, sometimes you wind up being where you're supposed to be for reasons you don't know.
Yeah, and I found it interesting. I mean, you came back and, like you said, you went overseas for a couple of years and coached with the Warriors, an assistant for one season or maybe two. I can't tell from my little notes here, but then you go back overseas for quite a while. 4 or 5 years to coach the Kuwaiti national team. What kind of experience was that?
Well, I had 2 jobs at that time. The international season runs from the international competition runs spring, summer, and fall. So when you're coaching what would amount to like an Olympic team, the best players in that country, and you play in the Arab Championships, the Asian Championships, you play in these qualifiers to see then if your team's going to be good enough in 4 years to go to the Olympics. Well, I was coaching the Kuwaiti national team, but I'd also gotten into broadcasting. And so during the college basketball season, even though I was still being employed by the Kuwait national team, their government, I would come back to the States and I worked as a broadcaster for ESPN. And I even, got games with CBS. So, excuse me, I had these 2 different jobs going on, and it made being the Kuwait national coach, it made it a lot easier because I wasn't over there, for 12 months. This was after the Gulf War, but I was coaching. And, it was not easy to live outside of America, but I was still doing what I love to do. Then I was coming home, during the college basketball season, and I was around basketball. So in a sense, I had the best of both worlds. I was young enough, my family was young enough at that time where it didn't create enough of a burden going back and forth. And so it wound up being something that if I had to do all of it all over again, I would. But it was
Did you move your whole family? Did your family move to Kuwait for that time period, or were you going back and forth?
They were with me, and we went back and forth until my son got into first grade, and he actually started first grade in Kuwait. And I give their education system the way the American school in Kuwait taught. The kids had to wear uniforms. There was a mandatory, this is first grade, a mandatory language requirement, and that language was always taught in that language. So when you walked in, if the language was Arabic, they didn't speak any English. You had to learn the language as such, which makes it more difficult.
Right.
But we decided then that it would be to his best interest to not go back and forth, but to leave him in one place. And so I went back and forth, but then my family stayed in Arizona.
So by this time, you haven't been a head coach in the NCAA or a major coaching position, let's say, in probably, I don't know, probably more than close to 10 years, probably, right? When you
about
came
10
back.
years.
Had you been burning to find another job in college coaching, head coaching?
That's a really good question. And I was itching to get back to the States. Yes. And my niche was college. That's where I started.
Right.
I thought when I first got into coaching that I would be a high school coach. And, because I think that's where the real teaching and molding really comes in. But there was a desire to get back into, and then I was around it because I was working for ESPN. So, I was kind of getting my college basketball fix, being close to it, calling games, but I wasn't coaching it. So, it was one of those things where, if an opportunity comes, I would jump on it, and then it did.
Yeah, Loyola you're talking about now, obviously, Loyola Chicago.
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island, right. You were on Jim Herrick's staff, right?
Yes. Jim was, we're assistants together at UCLA under Gary Cunningham. And after Jim left UCLA, he was out of coaching for quite a while, and he got the Rhode Island job. And, it was great for me because, again, I'm doing two jobs. I'm working. And so he brings me back and hires me full time at the University of Rhode Island. And I'm there for 1 year. We get to the Elite Eight game in the NCAA tournament.
Another
really
surprising run in the tournament, right?
Yeah, great run in the tournament.
You had a couple of those surprising runs in your career as an assistant anyway. So
just a lot of fun. It's
fun
amazing when you go in and you're a complete underdog, mid-major team, and you get all the way to that. You get to the Elite Eight, or that's fun stuff.
Yeah, and Jim put together a couple of good teams at Rhode Island, which isn't obviously probably a very easy task to do.
The first team that we had there, Al Skinner, who later went on to coach at Boston College, had a great career there. Al left a really good team for us with good players, and Jim Herrick is a great recruiter, and so we inherited this great team. And then one of the first players that Jim had to re-recruit was Lamar Odom.
Mm-hmm.
And so Lamar couldn't play our first year there. But, I think we finished third or fourth in the A-10, but got hot in the NCAA tournament. We were eighth or ninth seed. So we played that 8-9 game. And, if you win that, good news is you win. Bad news is you play the number one seed. And we played the overall seed, which was Kansas. And, but we wound up beating them and then making that run.
Yeah, I remember that run very well. It's funny in college. I told you I kind of like UCLA when I was a kid, and Marquette through the Al McGuire years, and even a little bit later. But I kind of root for the underdog every year. I look for somebody who's just not off the radar just enough, and it's harder today, right? Because people aren't really off the radar with ESPN and the way that the internet is today. Everybody's on the radar, so.
Yeah, but you can still fall through the cracks in terms of, like you said, now there are so many games on, and TV does a much better job now. They had that one segment, the Bracket Buster, where there was a tournament that was just set up so you could get to see, some of the better teams. And that's really, you think about it, that's how Gonzaga and Butler teams like that made that transition from going to being just, well-kept mid-major secrets to, where the expectation became so great for them. I mean, you look at Gonzaga now, and, I think they're ranked number one this year, aren't they?
They are, and I think they just beat Kansas too. So they're not there for. It's not a mirage why they're there. So it's amazing what's happened there.
Yeah.
So you do get another head coaching chance at Loyola, and you were there. Again, a decent
6
number
years.
of years. Actually, that might have been your longest coaching stint, head coaching stint, right?
6 years. Yeah.
Did you enjoy that? Now you're further east than you've been, I guess. As a head coach.
Yeah, I've coached in every time zone, including the University of Hawaii, and so you kind of look at those contrasting. You coach at Kuwait, you coach their national team, and then I'm an assistant at the University of Hawaii. Well, that kind of pretty much covers half the world. No, I was at Loyola Chicago for six years. Six great years. I enjoyed my stay there. And then I left Loyola and I went into broadcasting. I was at broadcasting for 3 years before I got the assistant's job at the University of Hawaii. And then that got me back into, I went from the University of Hawaii to, I got hired by a very good friend of mine, Steve Hawkins at Western Michigan University. You talk about a guy that's run a high-level mid-major. He had that job for, I think it was 18 or 19 years. I was there for 2 years, went to North Carolina State with Mark Gottfried, who worked for Jim Herrick when Jim won the national championship. But that job was an administrative coaching position. So I was more responsible for, academics and that kind of stuff. And then went back to Western for 5 years. We won a conference championship there, and Coach Hawk was coach of the year. And I was there for 5 years, and that was 3 years ago, and then I retired.
Did you have any, so after Loyola, excuse me, you were in an assistant position of one kind or another, obviously, the rest of your career. Was there any other, again, dalliances where you were thinking about becoming a head coach in that time, or you kind of had your fill of that? Or do you still have the desire today?
You always, once you've been a head coach, there's always something about running your own program and doing it your way. There's also something about being good at being an assistant. Your loyalty, being a person that helps guide, that head coach, giving him information that's going to help him be successful. Your relationship with the players is so much different when you're an assistant. You're not making those decisions that determine who plays and who doesn't play. And so it allows you to become closer. You have a different relationship. When I'm a head coach, I like the payday was a lot different, but I missed the interaction with the players. And so I look back at I coached basketball for 44 years. And, when I did it, when I went into it, I was just going to do it for 1 year, and 1 year turned into 44. So did I miss being a head coach? No, I would have missed not coaching at all a lot more than whether it was an assistant or a head coach. And so to have parlayed what I thought was going to be a year of coaching into a 44-year coaching career, which is how I look at it. I've just never really worked a day in my life.
Well, that's a good way to look at it, because it's important. You know what? You're right. If you enjoy what you do, then you don't work a day in your life. So it's a great way to look at it. Are you retired for good?
Probably not. I've been writing a book, and I started writing this book about 3 months ago. That was one of the byproducts of being at home in this coronavirus. And I started playing basketball late in life. Most kids start playing when they're young. I started playing basketball when I was in the 9th grade. And to go from being a kid that sat on the bench as a sophomore in high school to getting a letter, a scholarship to UCLA, all of that happened over 4 years.
Well, you and Michael Jordan.
Well, he's a little bit better in the ninth to 10th grade than I was. I guarantee you that.
Well, you got something in common with him anyway, regardless.
Yeah, and 12 years after I took that recruiting visit to UCLA, and I sat in Coach Wooden's office with him. 12 years later, that office was my office.
Right.
And so it's an amazing story. It just, the stars all aligned for that to happen. And so I decided to write a book, and it's a coaching book, it's a inspiration book, it's a lot of different things. Haven't really decided where it's gonna go, but it's an amazing story. And now that I'm retired, I think it's kind of telling.
Is there a working title for it, Larry?
I messed around with a couple. I told my son, I gave him a couple. I said, "What do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And, he kind of put the kibosh on it. He didn't give me the thumbs up. So he's a real smart kid. So I'm not gonna go with that one. But it's obviously gonna pay a great deal of. I spent a lot of time. It's about my experience getting to UCLA and then becoming an assistant and head coach, and so. It's going to definitely have something to do with UCLA. I think that's the only reason anybody would want to read it anyway.
Well, I think, you got you've had a lot going on. You've had a great career. It's funny because, in some of our back and forth here, you were like, how long are we going to be on? I said an hour or so. And you were like, I'm a pretty boring guy. How are we going to fill an hour? You sent me your website. And I had a giggle when I get that, because I do a lot of research on guys, and I had plenty of stuff to talk to you about. We could have filled another hour in my mind. You're far from a boring interview. I've had a great time with you today. And when the book gets closer, I hope you'll let me know so we can push it, and we'll have you back on, and we'll push it once you get to publishing it.
Love to do it. I would love to do
it. I really enjoyed this, and I'm gonna wrap up the show. But if you want to stick around for a second in the green room, I'd love to chat with you real quick before we say goodbye. And if you can't, I understand. But I'll be just a couple minutes wrapping up the show, and I'll chat with you a little bit more.
All right. Thanks, Keith.
So my guest's been Larry Farmer. I thank you very much for coming on today, Larry, and I'll talk to you in just a couple minutes.
Okay.
So that's my guest today, Larry Farmer. I think Larry was a great guest. I was excited to have Larry on. As I said, I had this, this infatuation with UCLA when I was a kid and started following sports, and I was excited when he wanted to come on the show. So I thank Larry a lot for a fun hour today. And again, I could have talked to him a lot more in depth, probably about the UCLA years and the rest of his career. It's a very interesting look at the life kind of a college coach, especially once you become an assistant and you become a bit of a nomad. I talked to Rex Walters about the same thing last week. So I thank Larry. I thank all of you for being here. I hope you'll share today's show. Next week, we'll have Hank Gola on. We're going to talk Hank Gola, the former sports writer from the New York Daily News and some other publications in New York. We're going to talk about the NFL. And don't forget our Sunday show, 8 a.m. Eastern time. We'll be wrapping up the college football season. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about college basketball. It's underway now with some postponements, as the same as college football. We've still got some COVID situations going on, but hopefully we can have a safe season here. But there's lots to talk about on that level as well. And of course, we'll look at the NFL. So I thank you all for coming in today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving weekend and you're off today and can enjoy it. As I said, I have got hours of work ahead of me putting up Christmas decorations, but I love it. It's a lot of fun. We're going to have a nice long Christmas season. I hope you guys get in the spirit as best you can. We'll talk to you soon. Keith Engel for TGI Sports Talk. See you next week.